Good day. Today we are going to demonstrate how to make up a rubber brake hose from a sample with an electric hydraulic crimper and how to specify and make sure it is done correctly. We receive our sample hose. We firstly place it down, measure an overall length of the hose. We then record this length on our certificate to record the number once the hose is made to make sure the hose is accurate length. We then secondly need to identify the fittings. We then can have a look in our catalogue and compare the fitting to the image in the catalogue to find the nearest fitting. And in this case, we have got an E50, which is an M10x1, which looks just like the sample. We then have to confirm and identify the other side fitting, which is a female fitting. And if we go down the list, we have a look, and the closest is the WC47, M10x1. Now, to confirm the thread pitches, we can take our fittings from our stock and screw it on just to make sure that the threads fit correctly. To confirm the fittings that we have taken are indeed the correct fittings. Now, once we have got our fittings selected, then its next step is to make up and get our cut length of our hose. So firstly, we can lay down our fittings at the correct length, which was, according to our certificate, 285. We fit the hose into the one fitting, and we mark our elongation, a very important mark for later specification checks. We then, for the second fitting, need to identify the cut length. We place our fitting tip at the measured length of the sample, and we mark behind the hex to determine our cut length. We then have our hose cutter, which has a very sharp blade and is designed such to cut right through the hose, ensuring a true, clean, square cut. Very important for the square cut, so that the hose bottoms flush on the inside of the fitting. We can then place our fittings on the hose. And again, the second fitting needs to be marked as well. That elongation mark, critical again for safety checks after the assembly. We are now ready to crimp the hose. With our spacer, we place the hose, checking that the fitting is at the edge of the spigot. Elongation mark visible in the groove, and we press the hose into the spacer. You will feel that it is a press fit and it clips into place. Ensure there is no gap between the collar and the top of the spigot. We can now place this into our crimper. We close the jaws to just before crimping, to just hold the fitting. Press the spacer up flush against the rear to get your fitting spacing flush. And again, just crimp to get the dies to hold your fitting. We then remove the spacer press the hose into the fitting so that it is right to the bottom, and continue and complete the crimp. Before any crimping is done, one has to make sure that your crimper is crimping with the correct setting to ensure a 10.5 millimeter crimp in the barrel. Once the first side has been crimped, a check is done. We will make sure of a 10.5 millimeter crimp in the barrel with our cutout vernier, very specifically to be able to get into the grooves of the crimped area inside the barrel. We then check the elongation mark to ensure it does not exceed 2.5 millimeters. And once these checks are done, we can then proceed to the second fitting. The same procedure as the first one. Fitting goes on, elongation mark visible. We slot the hose into the spacer, clipping it in place, ensuring no gap between rear of the collar and the spigot. Again, into the crimper, same as the first fitting. Spacer at a slight angle so that you don't get your spacer caught in the dies, damaging your spacer. Dies come up closer, press your spacer flush up against the rear of the die, and again to just hold your fitting. Remove the spacer, press the hose firmly into the rear of the fitting, and complete crimp. Now we are ready to check the second side's safety checks. Again, we check the crimp specification at 10.5 millimeters in the barrel of the crimp. We again check elongation. Another critical check, must not exceed 2.5 millimeters. The risk of the gap being more than 2.5 millimeters is that the hose hasn't bottomed in the fitting, which under pressure could in fact come off. If the crimp at 10.5 is crimped more than the 10.5, the hose can burst behind the fitting. If not crimped enough, the fitting can come off. We have a training manual which advises the whole step-for-step procedure as been demonstrated in a beautifully laid out training manual. Lastly, once your hose has been crimped, and very importantly, one has to ensure that there is no blockages in your hose to blow through. We are now able to complete our certificate. We have an overall length of the completed hose is in this case now 289 millimeters. 289 millimeters. You would notice the hose is 4 millimeters longer now. That is not critical. 5 millimeters longer is not a problem, rather longer than shorter. The pipe is not blocked. We blew through it. It is not blocked. We can now record the dimensions of the crimp that we have made. And in this case, we have 10.5. Side 2 is the opposite. We need to check that as well. And is also 10.5 millimeters. The elongation is 1.5 millimeters. And on the other side, elongation is 1.2 millimeters. Notes: hose is 4 millimeters longer than original, tested by Grant and signed. I am happy that this hose meets to specification and can confidently send this hose as the new replacement hose. Thank you.